Welcome to day two. My name is Nigel People. I'm the Director of Policy and Research here at the PLSA. And obviously I'm enormously pleased to be welcoming Guy Opperman, the Minister for Pensions and Financial Inclusion, up here with us. And I just want to say, Guy, thank you very much for making the journey up at this busy and difficult time for everyone. We really appreciate that. As is the nature of these things, when you have to introduce someone, you tend to have a little look at their biographies, and I was doing that last night and looking at the government website. And three things in Guy's...
Oh God, here we go.
Three things in Guy's biography came out that I thought were worth drawing out. So the first of those is that he was actually appointed in June 2017, almost 3 years ago, which is pretty good going. And Steve Webb only made 5, and so I think there's no reason why the Minister shouldn't be able to come up on the inside and maybe peak Mr. Webb to the winning post on that. And secondly, when he was appointed back those 3 years ago, rather than just being Minister for Pensions, he asked to also cover financial inclusion issues. And I know that's something that he's very passionate about, and I think that's reflected actually partly in the interest he has in engagement and how to get savers understanding their position. And finally, and some of you will know this, the Minister is a jockey, or at least an amateur jockey it says there, although I did hear him saying he won a race just a few months ago to a friend a few minutes ago. And the thing is, I think the Minister has certain temperaments which are suited to a jockey and maybe are suited to being a Minister for Pensions. So the first of those is that, if you don't mind me saying so, he's in a hurry. He likes to jump over obstacles, and he wants to get the race done, to coin a phrase. And so I think we'll be hearing more about that from the Minister in a few moments. Right, just a word. As you know, you've got the conference app if you want to ask any questions of the Minister, and we'll try and see if there's a few minutes for those at the end of it. But for now, please join me in welcoming Mr. Opperman to the stage. Thank you.
So, thank you, Nigel. It is true I am a former jockey. It is also true I've put on weight since, as you all are commenting to your neighbour, I'm sure. So clearly, we meet in a situation where I think sort of Dickens put it rightly in Tale of Two Cities, the best of times, the worst of times, an age of wisdom, an age of foolishness, a season of light and a season of darkness. And it is quite clear, a serious and genuine issue that this country is facing, and there was a budget yesterday that addressed not just the fiscal future for this country, but also how we deal with the coronavirus and the problems that faces. And I am genuinely confident both that we will see this through collectively as a stronger nation, and that also that with a universal healthcare system, which we have the pleasure of having, and lessons learnt from previous countries, that we can overcome this. But it will clearly require all of our efforts and a change of fundamental behaviours. The conference itself is relating to mind over markets, which, as a Conservative, I'm a strong believer, obviously, in markets and the power of markets to deliver results. But I also recognise the irrationality at times of markets, and I certainly marvel at people who are stockpiling toilet paper in a way that seems to me that wouldn't be necessarily the number one issue I would be stockpiling. But we also now, and we understand that the focus on here and now, and how is it as a organisation who are championing pensions, that you can get the best outcome for savers on a long-term basis, whilst also encouraging personal responsibility. And then have at the same stage a strong dose of competition, which we want to try and encourage amongst the whole investment chain. We all accept that inertia is a powerful weapon. Lord knows I'm the Minister in charge of automatic enrolment. And it clearly is a weapon for investment consultants as well as fund managers, regulators, and sometimes ministers. There is also the famous tale of the Member of Parliament who, approaching an election, broke his leg and spent the entirety of the election flat on his back, recovering, and had the finest result he had ever had at a general election. Too much engagement with the voters and working too hard, sometimes they say, is an adverse thing. There are some here who would like me to do less. There are definitely some who would like me to be less of an innovator. I have to say I reject that, and I don't believe that is the right approach. My job surely is to support what you do, support the members that you represent, but to innovate and to change and to set out an ambitious programme of work that refocuses markets, pioneers innovation, supports savers, and intervenes and protects and improves outcomes where we have to do so. Now, I start and end with the Pension Schemes Bill. It is a bill, I think that my good lady would say I spend more time with this bill than I do with her at times, because we have worked on a phenomenal basis to make this happen. Whether it is the introduction of collective defined contributions, which is, we see, the third way of pensions going forward, whether it is protecting members from unsafe transfers, new regulators' powers, firing up the regulator to take a different approach, scheme funding changes, and the pensions dashboard. Last week it completed the committee stage in the House of Lords. There were 100 separate amendments put forward during the committee stage, which were mostly probing amendments, but I look forward to seeing its progress, and I will be steering it through the House of Commons after Easter, and I hope that with a goodwill and a cooperative work from my Labour colleagues, and due credit has to go to Jack Dromey, who I work with on a regular basis, I hope that that will become law by the end of the summer term, sort of mid to late July. The regulator powers clearly are an issue, and I want to just briefly address this, that Part 3 does introduce new criminal offences targeting conduct which avoids employer debt to pension schemes or risk accrued scheme benefits. I recognise that there are concerns amongst some about the scope of these offences. However, I want to just clarify and take the opportunity to highlight that it is the conduct that we are focusing on here. It is only an offence if the person intended to harm the scheme or should have known that the conduct would have that effect, and they have no reasonable excuse for their actions. It is important that where these offences have been committed, the regulator can respond appropriately, no matter who has committed them. It is not the government's intention to interfere with routine business activities. We want to improve protections for members whilst being proportionate to business. You will all understand that this was brought in following the actions of Philip Green. These are the people that we are focused upon. There is much I could say on scheme funding, but quite clearly the funding measures in the bill bring in the secondary legislation and a revised DB scheme funding code, which will provide clearer funding standards. Last week, the regulator launched the first of two consultations on a revised DB funding code of practice. The first consultation seeks views on a proposed new regulatory approach, the principles underpinning the framework, and how they can get clearer guidelines. The second consultation, which is planned for late in 2020, will be on the draft code itself. We believe these legislative measures will help to ensure that trustees and employers are clear about what they're required to do and will enable the regulator to take action more efficiently and when needed to protect members' pensions. I could talk at length about the dashboard, but I think you know that I am utterly committed to ensuring that the dashboard goes ahead. We believe it is the right thing to do. We are continuing to work with the industry delivery group. I met with MAPS and Chris Curry and the team only recently. But I want to make one point to those of you who have data. There is clearly a requirement for data standards, and that is being worked upon. But be under no illusions, you should not be waiting for legislation to get your data ready now. I don't believe inertia is an option in this. There will be draconian penalties for those who do not have their data ready. And I'm certainly of the view that given that effectively the data should be ready now, if I as a member should be applying for it, there is no legitimate reason for delay. Certainly schemes need to invest in improving the quality of their data. If you have not done that now, I think you need to take a long, hard look at yourselves and ensure that you are in the best particular way ready for the future. I want to talk briefly about self-employment. It seems to me, speaking as a very fat former self-employed jockey, I didn't get a lot of work, as you can imagine, or a self-employed barrister, it seems to me that with 15% of the population self-employed, you are competing in a UK market or a worldwide market, which is becoming more and more competitive. And yet the largest growth market is self-employed. So I find it astonishing that you aren't engaging more to try and take these individuals into your schemes and into your funds. It certainly seems to me that we need to be trying to help them. Certainly as a government, we are trying to enable schemes and opportunities for people who are self-employed to have access to pensions. Clearly, we're looking at automatic enrolment on that. We are trying to tailor messages and doing trials. You'll be aware of the Nest Insight trial and the work they're doing on sidecar savings. And it is entirely right, as Nigel outlined, I am the Financial Inclusion Minister. I don't do these speeches without making a significant point to all of you, which is, will you spend your life selling financial services in one shape or form? My simple question would be, what is it that you are doing for the financial status of your own individual employees? Are they genuinely financially included? Are you setting up a sidecar savings in respect of your own employees? Are they part of the 10 million people in this country who don't have rainy day savings of £100? Because if those are that is the state of your employees, I think you need to take a good, long, hard look in the mirror. We are doing what we can to improve the financial inclusion of this country. We are doing great efforts to try and improve self-employed, but I would urge you to look at how you run your business as well. I want to talk about simpler annual benefit statements. It is absolutely a passion of mine. It is something that I'm determined to drive forward. And as you know, we have a consultation outstanding. There was a mixed response to the consultation, and I'm grateful to all of you, including the PLSA team, who responded and took time. I suppose my simple question is, I normally do a show of hands, and it's quite hard because there's quite a lot of lights on me here, but who here genuinely believes that their mum or dad, or if you're sufficiently young, your grandparents, genuinely understands their present pension statement? Stick your hand up if you do. I can see a couple. But you're not exactly all rushing forward to say, look at my statement, this is so simple. I am utterly persuaded that the 20 to 43 pages that we send out to members are not doing the job that they should be doing, and that a simpler statement is the way ahead. Clearly, I've got to address this and take this forward, but I've yet to be persuaded that anything other than a simpler statement is the way ahead. So I think if you haven't started looking at how you simplify your statement, I suggest you do so. I want to talk about illiquids, which applies not just to the pension funds, but also to the asset managers here. Clearly, a back-of-the-envelope calculation can show employer contributions alone. But I believe investment growth has to be required, and required in a different way. I'm persuaded unequivocally that improved scale and improved choice in DC pension schemes will drive better returns. Research by Corporate Advisor suggests that the total assets in 25 Master Trust has grown from £36 billion to over £55 billion in less than a year. And at least 3 schemes are expected to have assets of £20 billion plus by 2025. There are many thousands of occupational DC schemes where members are themselves the trustees. Trustees of these schemes suffer obviously from power imbalances when trying to engage service providers, with little more power than retail investors, and they're missing out clearly on good governance. So I'm looking forward to bringing forward regulations for consultation in the spring to nudge these schemes towards consolidation. And be under no illusion, consolidation is what we are going to try and do. I'm also looking to consult on regulations which allow schemes to pay performance fees where they wish without diluting the charge cap. This might give schemes a wider choice of illiquid investments in certain higher risk sectors. Along with the FCA's work on updated rules on permitted links and Treasury's work on patient capital, this has potential to deliver diversified returns whilst facilitating investment in the assets we all need. And I don't think you should be under any illusions post the election on December the 12th that investment in infrastructure and illiquids is something that the government is passionate about. We are creating a diversification of DC pension scheme default offerings, and going forward, we believe we have the potential to smooth and diversify returns and improve long-term member outcomes. The DC default offering, in my view, is developing, and I welcome that. I want to finish fundamentally on the issue of ESG, because I know that that is something that you've been focusing on tremendously. I'm delighted that PLSA are leading the way on this. I had a private breakfast with many of the key members here, and I very, very much believe that this is something that we have to address. It's not simply the right thing to do. It seems to me that if you are in the pensions and savings business, you start with a fundamental principle that you believe savings should be done for the longer term. If you aren't addressing climate change, there is no longer term. It is the defining issue of the 21st century. So it somewhat negates the point of your argument in favour of a pension scheme. I believe it is a risk like inflation or interest rates, exchange rates, or company or sector performance, but it is probably the largest risk, quite frankly. You will be aware of the likelihood in terms of coal and certain other particular sectors on a long-term basis and how they will potentially fare. But this is a risk that is not only unprecedented, but it is also irreversible. So I make no apologies for the fact that the government is taking this very seriously. It is not just this minister, this is a cross-government approach, and I think you will find significant changes in the way that this country is being governed, particularly with COP26 coming up. There is also a strong argument that climate change is a material risk. Trustees need to engage with that, and I believe that many people from the FCA to Mark Carney, the PM, and others are pressing you to do this. It is not just me. Climate risk will doubtless have an impact on outcomes for your beneficiaries, and I think that is why we had to act. So I have put forward an amendment to the Pension Schemes Bill. Clearly, we started with ESG, which we brought forward 18 months ago, but I took the view that we needed to go further. We sat down with Mark Carney and we decided that TCFD was the way ahead. I intend initially to use these powers to mandate public disclosure in line with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. However, I am also interested in scheme reporting of Paris alignment as a more compelling way that schemes can measure and report their climate risk. And I make the point, understanding what good looks like is clearly going to be one of the difficult issues going forward. But that doesn't stop you beginning that process right now. Schemes have clearly got to move away from high-level stock or box-ticking disclosures to make much fuller reporting. That includes governance processes, the exposure of their scheme to different temperature scenarios in pounds and pence, and the scheme's carbon footprint, expressed as a weighted average carbon intensity. When the bill has completed its passage through both houses, I intend to launch a consultation in early summer on which schemes should carry out TCFD, how and when. I do anticipate a phased approach, starting with the larger schemes, and I expect easements early on when data may not be available. But I do not anticipate this taking long, and on this particular issue I am unquestionably in a hurry. I will be expecting the pensions regulator to take swift and decisive action where there is a weak governance or poor disclosure. We have limited time, and there is much that schemes of all sizes can and should be doing now. My thanks are due to the guidance published today. There is no reason now not to know how to implement TCFD. Stuart O'Brien of Sackers and others have produced a really excellent guide which takes the TCFD recommendations and presents them in a way which complements the pension scheme's trustees' decision-making processes. And carrying out TCFD-aligned disclosures is not just about showing you're working and demonstrating that you've considered climate change. It's also learning from the process of considering climate risk in your governance, your risk management, the development of your scheme's strategy, and developing and reporting against metrics. I believe that the Pensions Climate Risk Industry Group has made a big contribution to assist with this. We all come from different standpoints or positions of awareness, but if you're new to this, I would encourage you to look at the tables produced by the Bank of England, the Appendix 3, which shows that coal losing 40 to 65% in the next few years of a low-carbon transition, oil losing 30 to 38%, and gas dipping below 15 to 25%. Before you panic, I would also encourage you to look at the accompanying TCFD Quick Start Guide, which indicates a range of immediate actions you can take to manage climate risk, including demands you should make of your consultants and your investment managers. It also steers you towards the opportunity to rate your holdings for Paris alignment using the PACTA tool and for management quality and carbon performance under the Transition Pathway Initiative. New tools are genuinely appearing all the time. It is going to be an awful lot simpler over the next 1, 2, 6, 12 months to make these assessments. The reality going forward is I appreciate that trustees will outsource much fund management to a regulated fund manager, but don't underestimate your power. You have great power now, and it is very much the case that you are going to be directing fund managers on an ongoing basis. And you're going to be asking them, what holdings do they hold? How is it that they're in high-risk firms? And you're going to need to get intelligent, non-greenwash, verifiable answers from fund managers about what they're doing to manage those risks. If you're not getting those, in my view, you should dismiss them and move on to someone else. There is no question in my mind that this is not about divestment. This is about active management and about change for the greater good. We live in very difficult and tricky times, but I'm absolutely certain that collectively we can address this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. As I said, the Minister, I think, is keen that we all up the pace on all these issues. There will, of course, be a session focusing on guidance and how to be climate aware in disclosures in a few minutes. So what I thought I'd do is just from the app, I'll just take 2 or 3 topics more related to the pension schemes bill and general developments rather than focusing more on this for a second or two. Thank you. So first things first, pension schemes bill. We're all aware that there wasn't anything on DB super funds in that bill, and I just wondered if you could share your thinking on what might be the next steps in that.
So, in relation to super funds, it is a complex piece of work. This is not the bill itself is 200 pages. It's about 125 clauses. A super funds bill would be 70 to 80 clauses at least, possibly as much as 100 clauses. It would be substantial, and we have an outstanding consultation that we need to respond to. The negotiations are still ongoing across government, and there are obviously various different types of super fund that one could take forward. I suppose the messages I would give is that the government policy is still very much committed to super funds. I'm obviously aware that people would like us to get on with it. It would not have been, certainly under the previous government and the previous capacity of Parliament, it would not have been possible to have produced super funds in this bill. It just physically was not able to do so, because I would have to respond to the consultation, draft the legislation, probably consult in some shape or form, and then produce the actual legislation itself. Clearly, that is something we will do in the fullness of time. Fight the battles you can fight right now. I've got a very substantial pension schemes bill, and super funds will happen. It's just going to take a little longer.
Okay, thank you. And then obviously we've been doing quite a lot of thinking and talking about the longer term and obviously focusing on climate change. There's also the question, something that's very important to this audience, of pensions adequacy and the contribution levels going into pension funds, and indeed the contribution levels under auto-enrolment. In the 2017 review, the government said, we're committed to actually increasing a little bit the amount of money that goes into pensions through removing the lower earnings limit of the AE band. And there was a commitment to do so by the mid-2020s. And I was just interested in hearing your thinking on when, without being funny, when the mid-2020s might be, just to help employers and schemes be thinking ahead on these things.
So it is entirely right that the 2017 AE review is fully supported by government, and it is entirely right that we will be bringing this in. But at the same stage, a specific and conscious decision was made not to include the automatic enrolment further provisions, for want of a better word, in this particular bill. Again, capacity is a genuine issue. If you want to try and do with CDCs and dashboard and other and regulator powers, You cannot have a bill is not of unlimited capacity. But at the same stage, it was not felt the right time to do that. And I think there are 3 really good reasons. The first is there is no need right now. Everybody knows this is coming. I accept you'd quite like to know, is it going to be on the 1st of January 2025 and what's it going to look like? But you know it's coming. The second is quite clearly there is a double jump. So probably the biggest job I have done over the last 2.5 years is navigate automatic enrolment through the April 2018 and 2019 increases. And in truth, whilst we all may have been very focused upon this, in reality, that is not something that the wider population, due to the wonders of inertia, have pushed back against. And yet it is a seismic change. It is a phenomenal change in all of our local communities in terms that the degree to which businesses and individuals are now paying more. And it is probably the biggest government policy programme that we've produced over the last 10 years. And yet you would barely scratch the surface of a newspaper to find anything about it. Working out how that has landed and working out the degree of opt-outs and whether we've got any particular difficulties with those is utterly key. Now, we did a double jump in the space of 12 months and a day. There is some analysis which we just published, which I have read briefly, but I haven't read it more than once. And I think there is a real desire to let this bed in and see exactly where we are. And I take the view that we've got a huge way. Just let's get through that and just have a real analysis of that. Opt-out is obviously key. Do I think 8% is sufficient longer term? No, I don't. And I'm absolutely committed to that being larger. But at the same stage, and the final issue, and I think it's become ever more prevalent now, is that at some stage there is going to be one of three things that are happening. Obviously, Brexit is about to happen, and there is an assertion that there may be an impact of that. Clearly, no one is able to guarantee that either way, but obviously that's something you've got to be aware of. You wouldn't want to impose a greater burden upon individuals and businesses as you are doing that. Secondly, there will at some stage be some recessionary impact on the economy. That is a cyclical thing. And the third stage is, if we were worried before, then the coronavirus and its clear impact on the economy would be such that you wouldn't want to be impacting upon big business or small business and saying, this is a potential thing coming over the horizon. And it seems to me it is entirely right by the PM and the Chancellor to say, look, we're just going to let this bed in. We're going to continue and support it as much as we possibly can. But in fact, they're actually reducing burdens. Only today I was, the budget yesterday means any business of less than 250 people is getting a business rate holiday. Statutory sick pay is being met by other people. There is actually, we're taking burdens away from business, not putting them on them. So it will happen in the fullness of time. There will unquestionably be a further pensions bill, it seems to me, in the lifetime of this Parliament, without a shadow of a doubt. And doing that in respect of AE is relatively easy.
Okay, so I think it's really great to hear you reconfirming that commitment. And as you say, we're living in interesting times right now, so
we
can understand. And we're not yet in the mid-2020s, even by a kind of Whitehall definition of the term. So in the remaining minutes, may I just ask you to kind of share your thoughts on the PLSA's initiative last autumn for the retirement living standards, which we hope is a great way of helping people engage and understand pension savings so they can be better aware about whether they want to save more or whether they're on track.
So, listen, I realise that the PLSA retirement living standards is not for everybody, hard though that may be for you to accept. But at the same stage, I think what it is a very good tool, and it is very helpful. And whether you look at the gold, silver, bronze approach, whether you look at what PLSA are doing and Australia are doing and others, an understanding of what the future looks like and what you're going to require is utterly key. My flip side of that is I would say, there are very few businesses out there who are doing midlife MOT. And I could not comprehend why you wouldn't be doing that. And I'm going to put I have only 2 pleas that I put out at these particular events. The first is, have a look at how you're doing financial inclusion for your own employees. The second is, why aren't you doing a midlife MOT? And Aviva started the midlife MOT with a view to doing an HR SOP, frankly, to their employees. and they ended up discovering that productivity by reason of midlife MOT went up by a massive proportion, staff retention went up by a massive proportion, and the business did hugely well on a very cheap, cost-effective thing. It is linked to the PLSA retirement living standards. The key is getting triggers in people's life to look at their health, wealth, work, and genuinely to try and get them to engage to save more. I welcome what you're doing.
Thank you. And actually, our estimate now is that the companies and schemes that are going to be using retirement living standards is up to 8 million savers. So I think it's really going to be something that can have a big impact, as you say, with other initiatives like midlife MOT. So it's important now that we switch over to the next session, and the Minister will be staying up here. But perhaps you just join me one more time in thanking him for coming up and joining us.
Thank you for coming.